Okay, so this month I'm going to introduce our speaker for January, and that is Dr. Alex. He is a master backgammon player who started playing as a child. He has a passion for improving his knowledge by analyzing the game. Alex has written multiple books on backgammon, and in 2023, he wrote his first published book called Backgammon Backgame Strategies. The topic was selected because there were no books written exclusively on the topic. With over 300 pages and 500 positions, it is the most thorough work on the topic to date and likely for the foreseeable future. Alex is also on the USBGF Board of Directors, won the Gammon Associates Player of the Year. He's commented on live streams and began giving backgammon lessons and created a YouTube channel with over 200 videos. When he's not working as a cosmetic surgeon or spending time with his wife and two children, he devotes a large portion of his time playing and studying backgammon. Through his videos and participation in the USBGF and Los Angeles Gammon Associate Club, he strives to help others learn to enjoy the game as much as he does. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. It's an honor, pleasure, and privilege to be here. Thank you to everyone involved in organizing this, April, Antoinette, Linda, and any others I may have missed. For me, it's really a pleasure to be here in the Women of Backgammon. Personally, of course, I love backgammon, and I try to get more people involved and playing in the game, and I try to get as many people as possible. And for me, some of the underrepresented demographics are women and youth, and really trying to target getting more of them in the game, and also because I'm getting tired of playing against grumpy old men all the time. Oh, hello to my good friend Patrick Gibson there. Um, so I'm happy to be here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Let me see here. And there we go. Is everyone able to see that now? I guess some people are muted, so I'm not sure if people can.
We can
I
see it. Looks great.
Okay, great. So some of the other things, if I do have a YouTube channel. I do a lot of videos. I've done a video on this topic, and some of the new videos that I do are Backgammon versus the Bot, where I invite a guest to join me and play a match against XG followed by an analysis. And I invite anyone in the stream or watching afterwards is welcome to join me. Just send me an email. I assume my email address can be placed in the description or in the chat. So I'll go ahead and continue. This was from the 2023 Los Angeles Open tournament that Candace Mayron and Patrick Gibson organized, and it was really a pleasure for me to be able to sponsor the women's tournament. I had the gift bags from my office, so that was a lot of fun, and I hope I can continue to do that. So we're going to, the topic of this is common second roll errors. And when I first started studying these types of things, I wanted to study the things that probably were the most important. And I said to myself, well, what's the most common position in backgammon? And it's the opening position, because that occurs in every single game. So, you know, the first rolls are pretty straightforward. There are not that many of them, and it's pretty easy to figure out. But once you do the first roll, there are many different options on the second roll. So I'm going to go through some of the things about the opening position so you understand it. And then what I'm going to go through is many second roll positions. And I'm hoping we can make it a little bit interactive. So I'll ask people what their play is. And if we're not getting feedback, maybe we can open up the microphone. But for now, I'll go through the opening position. So this is the opening position. We're playing the blue checkers at the bottom. The opponent is the white checkers at the top. And blue is going in a clockwise direction, bearing into the home board on the lower left quadrant. And white is going in the opposite direction, in the counterclockwise direction. And their home board is on the upper left. So in the opening positions, in the opening position, the major liability for both players are the two back checkers. So that's circled here. That's basically the source of the biggest problems, the biggest concern that people will have to
Yes.
address. And that's part of the reason why the name of the game is backgammon. Gammon means game in, I believe, German, and back refers to these back checkers. Um, so that's the primary liabilities. The secondary liabilities are these awkward and inflexible stacks on the 6-point and midpoint for both players. So these are the kinds of things you want to address on the opening roll as well as the second roll and then moving forward. So always remember, look at the entire board. Think about what are your liabilities, what are your assets, and what you want to do about it. Sometimes I think about this even before I roll, so I know what I want to do. And then when I roll, then I look at these things again and think about them and make my decision. So this is the dice distribution feature of the opening position. So this includes all the doublets. So basically this shows you the equity after any roll. So if you were to be able to roll a double six, your equity is going to be about 0.6. Double four would be the next best, double three, then double two, and double one. Now, of the legal ones, the non-doublets, the best opening roll is a 3-1. And then the next one after that is a 4-2. And let me move this. And then 6-1. And then after that is 6-5. One of the things you notice about these is these top three rolls, 3-1, 4-2, and 6-1, what do? They block your opponent from escaping, at least in part. It's only fourth best, which is the one where you can escape yourself. So what that means is it's easier to block your opponent from escaping the back checkers than to escape yourself. Because even if you escape one back checker, you still have another one to worry about. So that's something important to think about. So now we're going to go through some second roll positions. And this is, so what I'm going to show is we're playing blue and white has made an opening roll. So in this case, white has played a 6-5 running, and now we have a 6-4. So, I can open it up. How would people play this roll? You'd have to unmute yourself. And it's okay. I tell people it's not important if you get the question right or wrong. It's more about learning and having fun. So how would people play 6-4 here?
So I don't know the lingo to tell it, but I would go 17 to 23 and 19 to 23.
17 to 23. Oh, okay. So we're blue. We're blue.
Wrong. Okay, yeah, the opposite. 6 to.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah. Oh, so that doesn't make sense. All right, cancel that thought. I'm
But
not
that's
used
right.
to, this is upside down for me.
Yeah. Okay. So the options would be, running one back checker or splitting 24-18 and bringing one down 13-9, or playing, making the 2-point. So there are going to be many of these. So I'll go through them, thoroughly, but quickly. So here's the correct answer here. The best is to make the 2-point. And you'll notice, one of the things you'll notice is that some of the top plays between the top play and the second play, oftentimes there's not a huge difference. However, the second roll is going to happen in every single game. So if you make a small error in every game, you're going to lose a lot of equity in the long run. So you're going to want to learn these and practice these to make sure you get the top plays. So this is what it looks like, and the resulting position is here. This is a small error, splitting here, and then running is actually a big error, and that results in this position. So why is that? Well, the opponent rolled the biggest opening roll, which is 6-5 running and escaping a back checker. So white is up in the race. After this play, you're going to be down in the race by 1. So you don't really want to do a racing type of play. And then the splitting play, what happens here is now the opponent has a stack on the midpoint, and the opponent really wants to unstack this, and now you're giving them a target. So you don't want them to roll a 6 to unstack and hit you. Here, it's best to just make the 2 point and block and try to keep this back here. Okay? So that's that one. Now what about 5-4? So the first set is going to be after a 6-5. So now we roll a 5-4. What are the options here?
13 to 8 and split.
13 to 8 and split. Good. And yeah, 24 to 20. The other reasonable option is to bring 2 down. So it turns out that that is the correct play to split. And that looks like this, resulting in this position. This is actually an error, a hit and split. A lot of people I see doing this, and this is incorrect in this position. One of the times when you do want to hit and split is if your opponent split to the bar point, because what that does is it disconnects the back checkers. If the opponent has split with one checker to the 18 point or your bar point, they're 6 away from each other. When you hit loose here, now they're 7 away, they're disconnected, and it's much harder to make an advanced anchor. But in this case, that's not the right idea, because they've run all the way. And then, so the benefit of this play is you bring a builder down to bring an extra checker on the 8 point. What that does is it gives you 4 checkers here. So if you roll a double 1, a double 3, double 4, or double 5, you're able to make the bar point and or an innerboard point or 2 innerboard points without breaking the 8 point. That's important. The other thing, when you split to the 20 point, this checker on the 20 point provides outfield coverage of the opponent's entire outfield. So you have coverage of all 4 quadrants of the board. Okay, so that's why you want to split to there, and you're splitting to the best point you want to make before your opponent has more than 8 checkers in the zone. So that's that. Now what about 5-2? With the 5-2, yes.
You want to define the zone?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the offensive zone, or the zone, is basically your offensive structure. So your zone is here, basically from your 1 point to the 11 point, or technically the 12 point. But basically all the checkers you have to attack in here, and sometimes it's defined differently. For example, if you own the 5 point, sometimes a checker on the 11 point is not considered in the zone because it's not bearing directly on the 4 point. But overall, basically your zone is all the checkers that you have on your side. What you start with 8 checkers in the zone, that's where you start. When you have 9 checkers in the zone, that's better for an offensive attack. And when you have 10 checkers, it's very strong. So when the opponent has 10 checkers in their zone, you have to be careful of splitting. But not when they have only 8. Michi has actually a good video about that. It's called ENT 8910. In any event, now the 5-2, you have the same 2 options. You can bring one down, 13-8, and then you could split the back checkers, or you can bring one down. What do people like in terms of this play?
Bring one down and split the back checkers.
Bring one down and split the back checkers. Okay? So it turns out that these plays are close, but it's slightly better to bring 2 checkers down, and that results in this position. So why is that? There are a couple of reasons. First of all, there's only 1 checker back, so you want to try to contain this checker as best as possible. With the 5-4, if you were to bring this to the 9 point, it's not really doing so good in terms of containment. But on the 11 point, you can contain it. So if the opponent runs out with like a 6-2 or a 5-3 or a 6-3 or a 5-4, you have a double shot. But if you're over here, he can pass with a 6-3 or a 6-4 or 5-4. So this is better for containment. Second, when you split here, this is a minor split, and this does not provide as good a coverage of the opponent's outer board as when you're on the 20 point. So this only has direct coverage up to the 16 point, rather than when you were on the 20 point, it has direct coverage up to the 14 point. So remember that when the opponent starts with a 6-5 and you roll a 5-4, you want to split, but a 5-2, you want to bring 2 down. And these are all for money games. When you have match scores involved, some of these may be adjusted, but it's important to understand what it is for money, and then kind of adjust later. Okay, so now it's the 6-5 with the 4-3. So what do people think here?
You could bring the 13 to the 9 and the 10.
2 down. Okay.
Yeah.
This one, they're actually pretty close. The best play is the minor split or the reverse split, where you play the 4 down from the midpoint and the 3 up. And that results in this position. So this is an important concept to understand. When you have a checker on the 9 point, that provides a lot of additional offensive potential here. The reason is because you start with your 6 and your 8 point, which are 2 apart. So I have this concept called dice value difference. It's basically a classification of the rolls. Dice value difference refers to the difference between the value of the dice. So for example, in a 4-3, the difference between 4 and 3 is 1. So 4-3 I call a DVD 1 roll. When you start with the 6 and 8 points, the DVD 2 rolls such as 3-1, 4-2, 5-3, and 6-4 are all productive because you can use them to make a point. When you have an additional checker here on the 9 point, now the DVD 1 rolls such as 2-1, 4-3, 5-4, and 6-5 work, and also DVD 3 rolls that can be used from the 9 and the 6 points such as 4-1, 5-2, and 6-3 become very productive. When you have the checker on the 10 point instead of the 9 point, a lot of the rolls become duplicated, like 3-1 and 5-3, and you don't have those DVD 1 and DVD 3 rolls. So that's one of the main benefits of having a checker on the 9 point. It's very strong. Second, when you're splitting your back checkers, if you have a choice between splitting to the 20 and 21 point, obviously the 20 point would be the better place for an anchor, but that's also the point that your opponent wants to make most. So having the checker here is a little bit better in that regard. But these plays are actually very close. Actually, most of these plays are going to be very close too. Okay? Now 2-1. So how are you going to play a 2-1 here?
I would bring one down and split from the back.
Bring one down and split from the back.
Yeah.
Okay?
Split from the back. That's what I would do.
11 and 23.
11 and 23. So it turns out that in this case, it's actually better to bring one down and slot. Okay? So this takes care of 2 of the minor liabilities. Remember how we said the major liabilities are the back checkers, the minor liabilities are these stacks? Anytime you can unstack these, it's good. Now the other thing you think about, it's a lot easier to unstack the midpoint than the 6 point. The reason for that is because from the midpoint you can go 6s, 5s, 4s, 3s, and 2s. From the 6 point, you cannot go 6s from the opening position, and you cannot go 5s from the opening position unless the opponent has moved one of the back checkers. And even if you were to roll a 5, you would move it to a point that you really don't want to make, a deep point. Ideally, you want to unstack the checkers on the 6 point to the 5 point and then the 4 point. And it's more important to unstack when you have 5 checkers on a point than 4 checkers on a point. So remember that. This gives you an opportunity to unstack both of these points and slot the next point you want to make. Also, this is the smallest racing roll, so you don't really want to do anything for the race moving backwards. Additionally, if the opponent hits loose with a 4 and stays here, such as like a 4-3, for example, or a 4-1, you're going to have good 6s from the bar. So you're going to be hit here, and you're going to have this checker on the bar. And notice when you're on the bar, you cannot come in with a 6, but you'll have a good 6 to hit a return shot. That's called having a good 6 from the bar, or diversifying your numbers. That's a key concept to remember, because that means 6-5, 6-4, 6-3, 6-2, and 6-1 become good because you're going to be able to hit. This is the only case when you roll an ace with a 5-1, 4-1, or 2-1 where it is correct. If you were to roll a 5-1 or a 4-1, it's correct to split and bring one down. 2-1 is the only time you want to slot. So keep that in mind. It has to do with this 6 and the fact that it's a small racing roll. This one is actually what I consider a medium error of 25 millipoints. Okay, so now we're going to look at when the opponent split with a 6-4. Now you roll a 6-5. How do you play the 6-5?
24 to 13.
Yep. That's the natural play, and that's what you would do with an opening 6-5. However, in this case, it turns out to be correct to hit 2 checkers. So you bring one down and hit on the bar point, and then you hit the second one here. Now, it's important to understand that when you're hitting this checker here, you're hitting it from the midpoint, not from the 8 points. And that's going to be important. We'll see that in a moment, because that's what's going to allow you to hit the other checker with the 5. Okay, now you have 9 checkers in the zone, right? You started with the 8 and you brought one down from the midpoint. So now you have 9. So that gives you a little bit more potential to be able to hit loose on the ace point, because you're able to cover it. It turns out that so that's the correct play, like that. The natural play actually turns out to be a blunder. So if you learn one thing, you're going to save yourself a 200 blunder every time this happens. And this is the same thing if the opponent rolls a 6-3 or a 6-2. And that results in this position.
Question. So you're saying it's really only safe to play equity wise the 6-5 from 24 to 13 in the opening, but not during the mid game. Is that correct?
That's a little bit of an overgeneralization. I'm just talking about the second roll. On the opening roll, it's clear to run, but in the case of a second roll, anytime the opponent splits with a 6-4, 6-3, or 6-2, it's correct to hit 2 checkers. In the middle game, there may be some more development, so there may be some other factors to take into consideration. One of the things I should mention is, if you have not read it, I highly recommend Bill Roberti's new series, How to Play the Opening in Backgammon, because he talks about all of these things. And you'll read about that and you'll learn about that. Does that answer your question? I believe that was Antoinette.
No, that was Michelle Reed. I'm sorry.
Oh, hi, Michelle. I
Hi.
don't see the people. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Does he have videos?
I don't know, but I do. I have another video like this. If you'd like me to make a video on a topic, you just let me know and I'll do it.
Okay. Thank
Excuse
you.
me, where is Roberti's topics or book or whatever that you mentioned?
So he has his website, thegammonpress.com. Maybe April or one of the moderators can put a link in the description.
And that's where that is. It's on Gammon Press.
Correct.
It's a book. It's a book of this.
It's a 3-volume book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll move on. Now we have a 6-3 to play. So now you cannot hit twice, but you can hit once with the 6. And then what do you want to do with the 3?
Move it from the 13 to the 10.
You can bring another checker down. That's good. That's a good option. Another option would be to split. It turns out that it's actually significantly better to split. Okay, part of the reason is because of what I mentioned before. Remember how when you have a checker on your 9 point, it produces a lot of good rolls. Specifically, fours and threes become good because you have what I call DVD1, DVD2, and DVD3 rolls that are good because of the way these are positioned. And the numbers 4 and 3 are both within 1, 2, and 3 of every other number on the dice. So fours and threes become really good. So white is going to try to attack back or try to make a good point. So you're going to want to split while you have the chance. Okay? So remember that when the opponent brings one down to the 9 point, they're going to start making points. They have a lot of point making potential. So that's when you want to kind of split when you have the tempo, when you're able to put the opponent on the bar. Okay?
Mm.
So this one is an error and it results in this position. Okay, so now we have a 5-4. So now how do we play the 5-4 here? It's the hard plays that are really challenging, right? There are many obvious plays. It turns out here, again, for the same reasons, because the opponent has really good fours and threes, and if you don't hit, they can either anchor with a 6, or they have a lot of good rolls to come out here. So here you have to hit for tempo, and then split while you do that with the 5-4. And that's the same with any opening 6 split, whether it's 6-4, as in this case here, or 6-3 or 6-2. And you do the same thing with the 5-2. So this is the play. And then coming down and splitting is actually an error because now you're just giving them so many options to hit here with 1s, 3s, and 4s, or anchor with a 6.
Why is it good to hit on the 1? It's a hard thing to cover and doesn't do anything to have it there. And
That's a very good question. So the answer to that question is it's not a good thing to hit on the ace point because you don't really want to make this point. However, the alternative is worse. The alternative is just allowing the opponent to make some further progress here. It's what's called a tempo hit. You're taking away half of the opponent's roll because the opponent will need to come in with a roll with half the roll before playing the other half of the roll, unless it's a double. So this is called a tempo play. You hit to knock them off balance, and then you split to give yourself a chance to either anchor here or possibly escape this checker or hit on the outfield or something else.
would you ever go from 24 to 15?
24 to 15, I didn't do the XG++, but what would happen is if you do this, now you're basically giving the opponent even more of the initiative. Because again, with the 6s or 5-1s, you can anchor, you can hit with 3s, 4-3, 4-1, 3-1 can make this point, and also double 3s, double 1s, double 4s, and then there's so many numbers that can make all these other points and or hit. You're just giving the opponent what's called the initiative, too many options. So that's why you don't want to kind of do that passive play. Backgammon is sometimes about aggression, but it has to be at the right time. So when you study these, you'll learn when is the right time and when is not the right time. Some of the things you'll have to think about when you think about safe play versus bold play. I know John O'Hagan did a recent video with the Women of Backgammon. That was outstanding. So think about those. One of the important things is, how strong is your board compared to the opponent's board? In the opening of the game, each player has a 1 point board. But once one player has a stronger board than the other, then you have to take that into consideration when you're making an aggressive play. Okay, so that was that one, and this one was an error. Now with the 5-2, again, this is the same kind of thing, and in the interest of time, I'll move a little bit faster on some of these, but this is the same idea, okay? And this would be an error. Okay, so now we have a 5-1. This is an important one to understand because I see this misplayed very commonly. What did we do with the 6-5? We saw it was correct to hit twice. So what's the play here?
Don't hit twice.
You don't hit twice. Okay. So good. I see a lot of people, they just hit twice because they can, because they see people do it with the 6-5. So what's the reason that you should not hit twice? And that's the correct answer. The correct answer is just hitting once, like so, resulting in this position. The reason for that is because when you do the hit, you're hitting with the 1, right? You're hitting 8 to 7, so that's stripping the 8 point, and now you only have 8 checkers in the zone. You don't have enough offensive power to attack. Um, when you roll the 6-5, you're hitting with the 6, and then you can hit with the 5 in addition. So you're going to have an extra checker in the zone, and you don't strip the 8 point. So that's important to understand. So this turns out to be an error. And I have this whole PowerPoint. I have the slides so everyone can review it afterwards. And at the end, there's a little bit of a summary that will go through all the important details. So if you miss anything, don't worry. All of it will be there. And if anyone ever has any questions, just feel free to contact me via email or Facebook or whatever.
So what's the correct roll for the 1 then?
So the 5-1, it's to hit with the 1 and turn this one down.
Thank you.
Like this. So the 5-1 is played here. Okay, next is double 4. So double 4s are doubles are more challenging. One of the things I learned one time from my friend John O'Hagan is that anytime you roll a double, pause, take a deep breath, and think, because there are usually many more reasonable candidates with a double 4 with a double than a non-double. If you read Bill Roberti's books, also another really good book is Opening Concepts by Michihiro Kageyama. That one is very good, very easy to read. The default play for an opening double 4, a second roll double 4, is basically 2 up, 2 down, moving 2 up from the 24 to the 20 point and bringing 2 down from the 13 to the 9 point, which is actually a reasonable play because you're making the best anchor here and you're bringing 2 checkers to the 9 point. Remember how I discussed how strong it is to have a checker on the 9 point? Having 2 checkers is even stronger because you have 10 checkers in the zone. It turns out that the best play here is actually to bring both checkers out all the way to the 16 point and making the 16 point. This is the only time it's correct to do this with a second roll double 4. So if you remember the exceptions, it's important, it's easier to understand. That's partially in part because you want to knock off that checker off the opponent's 9 point because that one's strong. So this is the alternative play, which is a small error. You are doing this and making the 9 point. However, you're leaving return shots here and you're making the back checkers disconnected. So it's better to simply just do this for this one. Okay, this one's a difficult one. Now with rolls like 4-3, this is where you want to kind of think about duplication. Duplication is basically where you're making a certain number good in 2 different ways for the opponent. So I'll just go through this. The correct play, it's a small difference, but it's to play 13 to 9 with the 4 and 24 to 21 with the 3. And what that does is it duplicates the hitting 2s here and the hitting 2s here. The additional benefits are those that I discussed before, that having the checker on the 9 point will give you more offensive options here.
How much do you take into consideration the other person's style? So if you're playing with someone who's constantly hitting you on the backboard, would you be a little bit more cautious about separating those?
Sometimes, but if you can induce an error, that's actually probably a good thing. I don't do too much of that on the second roll as opposed to like later on in the game. The second rolls are relatively standard. But that's a good question.
Thanks.
Okay. So this one is a small error, despite the fact that you're duplicating 3s here and here. You're not giving yourself good rolls upcoming, and you're giving the opponent the option to possibly hit you and make the next most valuable point in their board. And then this one is something I see very frequently, and this is really bad. It does disconnect the back checkers, but it strips this. It fails to unstack the 6-point. It fails to unstack the midpoint, and it fails to split or do anything with the major liability with the back checker. It just makes your position worse in every regard, other than the fact that you're putting the opponent on the bar. Okay, so now with the 4-2. One of the things that you should know is when your opponent splits with a 6, with the exception of the 6-4, it's correct to make the 5-point with a 3-1. We're going to see the 3-1 in a moment. With the 4-2, it's a little bit different because even though you can make the 4-point, you can also hit here. So the correct play is actually 13-7. Okay? The difference is with the 4-2, you would be able to make the 4-point rather than the 5-point. And I don't know if you remember, but you could always go back and look. The strength of a 3-1 is much higher than the strength of a 4-2 on the opening roll. You have about 100 or so millipoints, or maybe 80 millipoints of equity higher when you make the 5-point versus the 4-point. So that just tells you how much more valuable the 5-point is than the 4-point. That's not to say the 4-point is not valuable. It's just not as valuable as the 5-point. Additionally, when you're able to hit here, you're able to hit with a checker off the midpoint, so you're also able to unstack the midpoint and bring a 9th checker into the zone. Whereas hitting with the 3-1, you're not able to do that. You would have to strip the 8-point and split. So remember that whenever the opponent rolls an opening 6-4 split, and the same with 6-3 or 6-2, if you roll a 4-2, you should hit. But if you roll a 3-1, you're going to want to make the 5-point. It's actually very close against the 6-4 to hit and split, and I think we're going to see that next. Okay, so now we have 4-1. So here, again, you're going to want to hit, and usually when you hit with the ace, you're going to want to bring another checker down. However, this one's an exception, and these plays are virtually tied. But again, because of the fact that that extra checker on the 9-point gives so many good rolls, you're going to want to split while the opponent's on the bar. So against the 6-4s, you're going to want to split more often than bringing a second checker down. So hit with the 4 and then split, resulting in this position. Doing this is actually very close. So this is not a big error. Okay, now double threes. Double threes is a position, is a role that I see very commonly misplayed in this type of position, and especially against an opening 6-3 split. The default play with an opening with a second roll 6-3, if you read Bill Roberti's book, is 2 up, 2 down, similar to the double 4. However, in this case, it's actually better to make the bar point on head by a pretty good margin, bringing 2 checkers here. Why? What are the benefits? Well, you put a checker on the bar, you bring 2 more checkers into the zone, you make the bar point, you block the checkers from the, you block the back checker from moving a 6, and you have a solid 3 prime. So that gets you a lot. Just the other plays are not, they don't give you as much. So you can hit and make the 5-point, but this is just very loose because it leaves 2 blots. And although you are making an inner board point, it's just too loose. You're giving them good 6s from the bar. Or you can do like this and make the 3-point where you leave only 1 blot, but you don't really like these gaps here. It's not as strong as having the bar point, and it's only bringing 1 additional checker into the zone. And then hitting and moving up is also an error. It does advance it and give you a good anchor, but now your opponent has good 6s from the bar, and you might get a 3rd checker hit back. And this, the default play, is actually a blunder. 2 up, 2 down. Although it does make the 10-point, it does make a good anchor. It just leaves the opponent with too many good rolls to actually anchor or make an offensive point or something like that. Okay, so with a 3-2, how do you play this one? This one, again, you want to do a duplication type play like this. Now you're duplicating the 4s. 4 is here and 4 is here. Not a great roll, but you just have to kind of remember these rolls like 4, 3, and 3, 2. You're going to want to try to duplicate numbers. Okay? This one, the tempo hit it turns out to be a small error. It does disconnect the back checkers and it unstacks the 6-point. But other than that, it doesn't have much going for it. All right, and that looks like this. So now the 3-1. Remember we were talking about this? So I think I already alluded to the answer, so I'll just show it to you. This is basically tied effectively. This is slightly better. If you're going to hit here, you're going to want to split when the opponent has the checker on the 9-point. So that is very slightly better than making the 5-point itself. If you make this error, that's not a big deal at all. So if you just want to think to yourself, anytime the opponent splits with an opening 6, whether it's a 6-4, 6-3, or 6-2, and you roll a 3-1, just make the 5-point. Ignore this blot. Okay, now you're going to have the best 2-point board, and you're going to be a favorite in a blot hitting contest. So if you have a hitting exchange, white has 3 blots. He's going to have to consolidate something. If you hit a checker and white has 1 checker on the bar, there are 4 rolls that fail to enter against a 2-point board. However, if you have a checker on the bar against white's 1-point board, there's only 1 roll that fails to enter. So that increase from 1 roll to 4 rolls is the biggest increase when you're adding one more point in your board, so, because you're quadrupling the numbers. When you go from a 2-point board to a 3-point board, you're going from 4 to 9 dancing numbers, and that's slightly more than doubling it. It is better, but it's not better by that same magnitude. So making a second interboard point is very, very good if you can do that early in the game. So this one, down in hitting is an error because hitting is good, but against the 9-point here, you really want to split. Okay, now double 2s. So the default play for a second roll double 2 is bringing 2 down from the midpoint, making the 11-point, and bringing 2 down from the 6-point to make the 4-point. That brings 2 extra checkers in the zone. That unstacks the 2 heaviest stacks, and it makes the 4-point. So now you have a 2-point board. So that's the default play. This is the only exception where it's correct to actually run all the way and hit like this. For the same reasons that we discussed for the double 4, you're just knocking that checker off, and it just gets more done. You're hitting 1 checker back from here, you're gaining a lot more in the race, and you've partially escaped the checker. It turns out that moving 2 up and making the 4-point is an error, and also the default play is also an error. I know this is a tricky one. Are there questions about this one?
Would you please just show us the best roll again? I'm sorry, I didn't quite gather it.
The best play is to actually hit with 24 to 16 like this. You see the arrow? And that in this position. So there are a lot of tricky ones against the 6-4. You're going to want to hit with the double 4 and make the 16-point, and with the double 2, you're going to want to hit. Other than that, you're never going to want to play the double 4 like that or the double 2 like that on the second roll. So remember some of these exceptions. Okay. So, and then this is also an error. You do make the best anchor, but you just don't get as much as the other ones. All right, now the double 3. So this is the same thing. Now it's a 6-3 split. A lot of times I'll see people thinking of hitting on the 15-point, but for the same reasons as the 6-4 split, the correct play is making the bar point on head. The second best play is hitting and making the 5-point. And then the third is hitting and making the 3-point. And then the fourth, this is a big error, it's almost a blunder, is to hit there. So remember those plays when the opponent opens with a 6 split, with a 6-4, 6-3, or 6-2, and then you roll a double 3. You always want to make the bar point. All right.
Could you just explain why it's so much better hitting on the 16 with those deuces, and why this compared to that? You don't do it with the 3 when he slotted the 15, right? But you do it when he's on the 16. But can you just tell me just why that's so much? Why you do it? I mean, I kind of get it, but I'm just saying, and I just wanted to hear what you're thinking.
That's a very good question. I'm glad you brought up that question, and I want everyone to feel free to ask these types of questions because this is how you learn. Remember how I said the checker on the 9-point is very valuable because it creates many more productive point making rolls. The checker on the 10-point is not, because a lot of them are duplicated. So knocking the checker off the 15 is not as strong as knocking it off the 16.
So it's primarily because of that DVD or whatever you're calling the 2.
Right, correct.
Thank you.
Additionally, you don't get, you look at the other upsides of this. So like here, you're bringing 2 extra checkers in the zone, making the bar point, blocking the 6s. You're not able to do that with the double 2s. So you have to look at everything. I think one of the most important things I learned from Bill Roberti's book is the subtitle of the second volume. It's 2 words: everything matters. So one of the most important things I learned from an old friend when I first started playing with the doubling cube is anytime you make a checker play or a cube decision, look at the entire board, because if you make a small change here or there, that might make a change in what you want to do. So always look at the entire board. Look at what happens after the play, after you make one play and after you make the second play. Look at what your assets are, what your liabilities are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and those of your opponent. And think about that. That's a lot to think about, but you take your time. You don't have to do it on every single play, but think about all those things, and oftentimes that'll get you to the right answer. So good. That was the double 3. Okay, so now the 6-3. So now it's the opponent split with a 5-4. Okay, and now you have a 6-3 to play. One of the things that's very important is you want to fight for the important point. So like the 5-point, you really want to fight for it. So you're going to want to hit with the 3. And usually when you hit with the 3 here, you're going to want to try to use the other half of the roll by by bringing a checker down from the midpoint, because of the fact that you strip this point and you only have 8 in the zone. So the correct play is just to bring one down and hit like this. You need to be aggressive, and you need to fight for those key points early in the game. If you get hit back, you get hit back. That's okay. Against the 1-point board, it's not a big deal. If the opponent had made the 5-point, that would be different. But in this case, it's correct. The second play is just the very passive play of doing this, and basically if the opponent rolls a 3 or a 2-1 or a 6-4 or a double 5, you're kind of back to square one, and you didn't really gain anything. But after this, if you're hit back, you may have a chance to hit an advanced anchor, you may have a chance to hit back. Okay, so you don't want to make the passive play here. And then here, the splitting and hitting play is incorrect because of what I mentioned. You're not able to unstack the midpoint, and you only have 8 in the zone. Anytime you strip the 8-point, it's usually really good to bring another checker into the zone. Okay, now 6-2. So this is the same kind of theme. I see a lot of people running, and that does duplicate the 4 to hit and the 4 to anchor. But here it's actually it's a blunder. You really want to just bring this here. I know in the 70s, I didn't play, but I read a lot of books. People would play 6-2, an opening 6-2 like this. That's a little bit of an overplay, but the idea was to make these high points. You really want to fight for the good points. So that's what you want to do with a 6-2. Okay, that results in this position. Running is a blunder. and that results in this position. And it's the same idea with the 5-3. However, with the 5-3, it's closer because you do have an option that's reasonable of making the 3-point. That's a small error. What's best is actually hitting the same way. This one is very common. I see a lot of people making the 3-point here, which is not terrible because you're at least making a point, but it's just not as strong a point, being a little bit deep, and you're not fighting for these points. And you don't get the additional benefit of bringing an extra checker into the zone, despite the fact that you're unable to unstack the 6-point. Okay, and then with the 5-1, this is the exact same idea. You're going to want to bring one down and hit loose, like this. It turns out the second best play, the natural play is a blunder here, and the second best play, it's still a blunder, but it's better than the third best play of hitting twice. Basically, the idea is you want to fight for the good points, and if you're able to fight for this point and unstack the 6-point, that's really good. One of the things my friend Phil Simborg always says is the word "and" is very important in backgammon, because when you can do one good thing and another good thing, that's very good. So here you can actually do 3 good things. Number 1, you're unstacking the 6-point. Number 2, you're fighting for the 5-point. And number 3, you're also unstacking the heavy midpoint. Those are some of your major liabilities, or the secondary liabilities that I mentioned. So that's the idea with these types of plays. Okay? Now with the 4-3, again, this is the same theme. You're going to want to hit, and you're going to want to bring one down. This is different. So with the 5-4 split, you're going to want to bring one down. With the 6-4 split, it would be different, but you're not going to be hitting this anyway. So you're going to want to bring an extra checker down, have an extra attacker here, and that gives you more numbers to make this 5-point. This one is a small error, despite the fact that you're fighting for the best point on both sides of the board. It's close. I see people playing this very frequently. And this is a 40 millipoint error. Okay, so 40 millipoint error is not huge when you're first learning the game. But if you're trying to improve and you keep making 40 millipoint errors, your PR is going to be very high, and doing all these is going to lead to more losses overall. So just learning some of these will help you a lot. Okay? Now with the 4-1. So again, the same idea. You're going to hit here, and you're going to bring one down, and that looks like this. The second best play of hitting and splitting is close, but you're going to want to bring that extra checker into the zone. And the third best is, this is something I see a lot. Hitting once and then hitting twice. So one of the things you should learn is sometimes you have a chance to hit twice. Usually, if the first hit is on a higher point, you don't want to use you don't want to continue and make the second hit on the deeper point. If white were to split with an opening 5-1, so the 5 was here and the 1 was here, and then you roll a 4-1, then you're going to want to hit with the 4, and it's already deep on the 2. Then the best play is to hit on the 1, so hit twice. But in this case, no. You really want to slot that point that you want to make. Okay? So this the results in this, which is an error. Okay, 3-2, same idea. So this is kind of repeating the same theme over and over. Fight for the good points, hit loose, and then bring a checker down. Splitting here is not as valuable because you're only making a small split there. And then the passive play, this is how my grandmother used to play. Bringing this down is just a blunder. Okay? 2-1. Guess what the answer is on this one? It's the same. Bringing one down and hitting loose. Hitting and splitting is a bigger error now. Okay? Now we're going to go to the rolls where the opponent played a 5-4. Now you have a 5-2 to play. So how would people play a 5-2 here?
The 13 to the 8 and the 13 to the 11.
Okay, good. Why would you do that?
Because there's nothing else really to do.
Okay, some people would bring the 13 to 8, and just like the opening roll, split the back checkers. So that's a reasonable alternative. However, in this case, the opponent has 10 checkers in the zone. Here is another book that I recommend, Backgammon Masterclass. Mochi wrote a really good chapter, the first chapter, about strategic visualization. When the opponent has stacks and many checkers in the zone, you want to avoid splitting. Because if you split and the opponent rolls like double 3 or double 5 or something to point on head, when there's 10 checkers in the zone, that's a lot of ammunition to complete a blitz. So you have to be careful. The correct play is to bring 2 down, which is correct, and that results in this. And it turns out this one is an error. And the second best play, which is not shown, is actually to bring 1 down and play 6 to 4, and that's shown here. Okay, so now what about when you roll a 5-1? So here you can bring 1 down 13 to 8, but you cannot bring another checker down. How do you play the 1 in here?
Six, five to slot it.
Yep. So 6-5 is an option, and splitting is the other option.
Right.
Remember how I said when you have the 9, 8, and 6 point, all the 4s work well? So look at how all the 4s work. Like 6-4 would be able to, split here and make that point. 5-4 can make this point. 4-3 can make this point. 4-2 can make this point. 4-1 can make this point. And double 4 is good, right? So with this, you can actually duplicate the 4s by playing like this, okay? And you do not want to split in front of these big stacks with 10 in the zone. The splitting play, which seems less aggressive, is actually almost a blunder. So don't split in front of big stacks when your opponent has 10 checkers in the zone. Okay? So now you have a 4-1. So again, you're not going to want to split with the 4 because that's just going to, be going under the gun. You're going to play the 4 down. So what about the 1?
6 to the 5.
Yeah, the same reasons, right? You're still duplicating the 4s, and now because of the fact that you have this checker on the 9 point, it's diversified because you have a checker on the 8 and the 9, so you have more numbers to actually make this point. Okay, so basically, you're preventing your opponent from making a good offensive play with a 4. Hitting and slot and split actually turns out to be the second best play, because it's also duplicating the 4s, but you really don't want to be here. Okay, now with the 2-1, again, this is the same idea, so I'll go through it more quickly. It's the same idea. You want to do this. And this one's even a bigger, splitting is a bigger error here because you would have good 6s from the bar should the opponent hit you loose here, as I discussed earlier. This turns out to be an error, almost a blunder. When it's 80 millipoints, it's considered a blunder. Okay, so now the 5-2 split, and you roll a 6-4. So what are the options here?
To make the 2 point.
Make the 2 point, good. Just like the opening point roll, making the 2 point is reasonable. You can also run. You can also split. It turns out that here it's better to hit loose. What you're doing is you're fighting for not the best point, but you're knocking the opponent's checker off there to prevent him from making that anchor or possibly escaping with 6-3 or 5-4 or making another advanced anchor, and you're bringing another checker in the zone. Additionally, the alternative of this doesn't really do all that much. Okay, if you get hit here, you're kind of back to square one. And the other alternative of making the 2 point, it is good. You have a second innerboard point, but it's a deep point, so it's not useful for priming. It is useful for blitzing, and already one checker is advanced past that point. So it's not as strong in terms of blocking as to whether the two checkers were both on the 24 point. Michi calls these glued on the 24 point. Now they're split, so it's not as effective here. And this one turns out to be a blunder because you're giving the opponent a lot of good rolls, like sixes here, sixes there, and ones, and combination eights, and a lot of other numbers. So you don't want to split here. Okay, so now here's the 3-2. The opponent rolled a 5-2 and split. How are you going to play the 3-2?
Hit twice.
Hit twice, so hitting here and then continuing, just like the 4-1 we discussed against the 5-1 split.
Moving 13 to 10 and 11.
Yeah, 2 down. Okay. It turns out that each of those plays are half right. The best play is to hit loose and bring one down here. So again, this is not the 2 point. When you hit on the 2 point, you want to continue to be able to hit. But when you hit on the 3 point, that's an exception. You're going to want to bring one down. So remember this, because some of these are really hard to remember. But with the 3-2, you don't want to do that twice. It turns out to be a small error. This is the second best play, which is actually very close, splitting and bringing one down. And this one is a small error. Okay, so now we have 4-3 to play. The opponent rolled a 5-1, and now we have a 4-3. This one's a tough one. I don't blame you. So here, it's the 2 up. This is called the Middle Eastern split. Bringing 2 up, that challenges these over here. And it's the same kind of thing you want to do against an opening 6-1. I did not include that here, but if the opponent rolls a 6-1 and you roll a 4-3, you're going to want to do the Middle Eastern split. The natural play is actually a serious error of just bringing this. That's too passive. But if you look, I didn't show all these other plays. These are all very close. So if you misplay this, it's not a big deal, because if you split somehow, it's all very close. So I probably shouldn't have included this in the presentation. Anyway, now the opponent came down with a 4-3, and now we have a 5-1 to play. So remember what we said about 10 checkers in the zone, right? You want to avoid splitting. So that's the same concept here. The 5 you're going to bring down 13 to 8, but you don't want to split here, because that's going to leave a lot of numbers. Double 5s and double 4s is just like too costly. So the correct play is actually to slot. And remember, this duplicates all the 4s that are good here. Okay? Second best play is a small error, 13 to 8 and splitting. So now we have a double 4. So this is also interesting, because there are a lot of options here. You can hit and make the 9 point. You can bring 2 out and hit. You can make the 5 point. You can make the 20 point and the 9 point. So in this case, the opponent has 10 checkers in the zone. So if you're able to make this point, that kind of blunts basically what all these are trying to do. The opponent has brought all these checkers in the zone with the hope of making the 20 point, or her 5 point or 4 point. When you make that 20 point, it just basically puts pressure on these two blots and prevents them from effectively unstacking these the 6 point usefully onto the 5 point. So here it turns out to be one of the rare ones where it's correct not to hit. Okay, so you're going to want to make the 20 point, and then you make the 9 point. Now you have a strong offensive potential here, and you're putting pressure on these. So next, white is going to want to consolidate some of these blots. That's going to give you a chance to make another inner-board point. When you have the 20 point and your 5 point, that's a very strong position. Oftentimes it's a double just based on that. But if you have the 20 point and you're able to make the 4 point or something like that, your position is very strong. So when you have the 9 point, that just gives you a lot of potential here. The second best play is hitting and bringing 2 down. but it just leaves a lot of return shots with 4s and 1s, so you don't want to do that here. And this is actually close as well, coming all the way up, but it's not as important as when the opponent had split with a 6-4, because these two checkers are back, and now it's going to be hard for this one to kind of come out. And the other way, the opponent has good 6s from the bar to anchor, but here you don't really have to worry about that. Okay, so now this is just continuing the same theme. You want to avoid slotting in front of all this. So the correct play with the 4-1 is to counter slot or to slot yourself to avoid being attacked. So this one, the splitting play, is an error. And the 2-1, it's the same thing. You're going to want to do the same thing, and it's a bigger error to split because you have good 6s from the bar. Okay, there's going to be a summary at the end, which will include a lot of these key points. So now with the 6-3, the opponents opened with a 4-3 splitting like this, which this is actually the better split with an opening 4-3 than the other split. So how do you play 6-3 here?
Whack the 4.
Hit the 4. Good, that turns out to be correct. You just want to fight for the good points, bring another checker into the zone, and the other play of going here is just too passive. Too passive. You want to avoid that. All right, so what about 5-4? It's also a 9,
Same thing.
and it's the exact same idea. You want to do the exact same thing. This one you have a slightly more reasonable option because splitting here is nice and bringing an extra checker into the zone, but you really want to fight for the good points. And it duplicates the hitting 4s. So remember how the 4s are good here? If you're gonna hit like this, now the 4s of entering are duplicated to make those other plays. So now with the 4-1, the opponent cannot make the 5-point or a 4-3 making this point or a 4-2 and so forth. So this is what I call like secondary duplication. It's not like you can't hit with the 4 and cover with the 4, but the secondary aspect of it is talking about the full roll. Like 4-1, if white were not on the bar, white would be able to make the 5-point with a 4-1, or a 4-3, or a 4-2 here, or a 5-4 here, and so forth. And this one, the hitting and splitting, is a big error. Despite the fact that you're duplicating the hitting aces, you just don't want to do that. That doesn't give you a lot. And again, this one is too passive. All right, so now with the 4-3. This one I see people frequently misplay by hitting twice. But again, for the same reasons that we discussed, it's better to actually hit once and bring one down. Hitting and splitting is actually close, but hitting twice is an error, because look what happens. You fail to unstack the 6-point, you fail to unstack the midpoint, you strip the 8-point, you do nothing about your back checkers. So, if you're hit here, it's really bad because you're going to lose a lot of ground in the race. And if you're not hit here, it's still really bad because now there's a blot there that you're going to have to make, and you really don't want to make your ace point early in the game, especially when the back checkers are here. So remember the double hits. Sometimes they're correct and sometimes they're not correct. With the 4-1, it's the same idea. You want to fight for the good points, so you're going to want to hit, and then the best use of the 1 is just to split the back checkers. So that's what you do here. It turns out that the second best play is the 2-up play, the Middle Eastern split. But that's still a big error. That's just giving the basically, you do the tempo play, taking away the opponent's initiative and making it harder for the opponent to do something constructive, like make an offensive point. And then the very passive play is a blunder of just coming down 13-8. Okay, so now another 3-2. So having heard all the things we discussed earlier, how would you play the 3-2 here?
Move the 13 to the 11 And
Okay.
I mean, 13 to 10, and then, I don't know. Actually, I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's why we're here. You want to fight for the good points. Again, the 6 to 4, but you don't want to continue because you want to keep it on a good point. That's why the 3 is going to be down. It turns out here that it's basically essentially tied with hitting and splitting, but you want to hit and stay here. So hitting and splitting is the top play. Hitting and bringing one down is virtually tied, too close to call, and hitting and continuing and hitting a second checker is an error. Again, if you hit on the 5 point or the 3 point or the 4 point or even the 3 point, and you have you have an option of hitting again on the ace point, you don't want to do it if the first hit was on the 5 or the 4 or the 3. The only time you want to do it is when the first hit was on the 2 point, such as with the 4-1. Okay? So this is an error, but I see this all the time. Okay, now double 2. So this is a good roll. And, sometimes in doubles you play them in pairs. So the first pair you're going to make this point. And then the second pair, it's actually not close. You really want to just bring these two down. That just brings another checker, 2 checkers into the zone like this, and now these 2 checkers are bearing on the open 5 point. So you're going to be able to make the 5 point now with a 6-3 and a 6-1 in addition to the 3-1 that you had before, as well as double 1s and double 4s, and double 3 still works. You can also make this point with a 6-4 or a 4-1. Okay. The half and half play is good, but you really rather have an asset than kind of a lot of blots lying around everywhere. And this one is good too, but this anchor is not the best anchor. It's better to just bring 2 down. And here you see this is a major blunder. Remember with the 6-4 it was correct to hit, but with the 4-3 it's a blunder to hit. It's really important to know when you should hit. Here the checker is here. The other time it was here. That's a big difference. When this checker is here on the opponent's 18 point, basically the opponent has coverage of all 4 quadrants of the board, so you really need to hit. But here, you don't need to hit here. Additionally, you're able to hit with the double 2s here anyway. So you want to be able to hit, unstack, and make a second point. This just gives up on all those other options. Okay.
You keep him.
So, yes, ma'am.
You keep him from making your 4 point.
Correct. One of the reasons to split is because you're slotting a point that you want to make, and you're preventing the opponent from doing that. That's a very good point, and that's something you should always keep in the back of your mind or even in the front of your mind. Now it's a 4-3 split. This is an incorrect play with an opening 4-3 for reasons I discussed before. You don't want to be on the point that your opponent wants to make the most, and you're on the 10 point rather than 9 points, so there are fewer good point making rolls. In any event, this is the same idea as before. You want to fight for the good point. You hit loose on the 5 point. Anything else is a blunder. Okay, so like running out, that's a blunder. You're just like giving the opponent so many options. And splitting is a bigger blunder because now there are even more options. You want to fight for a good point. And guess what you want to do with the 5-3? This one is closer because you can make the 3 point, but still you want to fight for the good point. So remember, when your opponent slots your 5 point and you roll a 6-2 or a 5-3, you're going to want to hit loose. Okay? This is actually almost a blunder. Now with the 4-3, this is the same idea as what we discussed before. You're going to want to fight for the good point by hitting with the 3, and since you hit on the 5 point, you don't want to continue. You want to bring the 4 down or split. They're close. Splitting is slightly better, or you can bring one down. And this is the second play. These are very close, but hitting twice is an error. One of the most common errors I see from players on the second roll is hitting twice incorrectly. So you're going to want to hit twice when the first hit is on the 2-point and then on the ace point. Additionally, with the 6-5, when the opponent splits, if you're able to bring another checker into the zone, then you can hit with the 6-5 twice, but not with the 5-1. Okay, this is another example of that same thing. So this is the 4-1. You're going to want to fight for the good point by hitting with the 1. And are you going to want to continue to hit the second one?
No.
No. You want to split or bring it down. So splitting is slightly better, but bringing one down is close. It turns out to be a 46 millipoint error to hit twice. What I tell people is, if it's a black error of less than 20 millipoints, don't worry about those so much. Worry about the red ones and the green ones. So if you're making a lot of red ones, focus on those first before going to the green ones or the black ones. Okay? 6-3, same idea as before. You're going to want to fight for the good point. The 4-point is not as valuable as the 5-point, but it's still pretty valuable. So just like that. Additionally, the alternatives are not very productive. Like running all the way, you're leaving 20 numbers to hit plus a 6-5. That's 22 numbers to hit, and then you're back to square one. Other than that, it doesn't do anything productive. Notice that when you run to the 15 point with a 6-3 early in the game, or even on the opening roll, it's very different than running with an opening 6-4. The reason is in part because you're giving more options to hit on the 15 point. Let's say this were not here and it was just the opening roll. The opponent could hit with 3s and 2-1, so that's 13 numbers rather than 11. Additionally, you're duplicating your own DVD 2 numbers, so 4-2 can be used to make the 11 point or the 4 point, and same with 5-3 and 6-4. Okay. However, if you roll a 6-4 and run to the 14 point, now your rolls are anti-duplicated. They're basically diversified because you can use the DVD one rolls such as 5-4, 4-3, and 3-2 to make good outer board points, whereas you can use the DVD 2 rolls such as 3-1, 4-2, 5-3, and 6-4 to make good inner board points. So you don't want to duplicate your own numbers. Okay, and then 6-2. Moved it forward. This is the same idea. You want to fight for the good point, and here you can either split or bring one down. Are you guys seeing the theme here? You want to fight for the good points, and you want to unstack these heavy points. Okay, so this would be close second. Splitting is a small error, and running is a medium-sized error. All right, 5-4, same idea. Same idea. You're going to want to hit loose. Partly because you want to fight for that point, and partly because the alternative is just giving the opponent so many numbers to just whack you over here. And then running here is again giving too many shots here, and it's duplicating your own rolls. 5-2 is the same idea. You're going to want to bring one down and hit. I feel like this theme is becoming very repetitive. So I'm moving through it a little bit more quickly. Splitting is reasonable, but you're not able to fight for this good point. Okay, and 4-3, again, the same idea. You want to fight for the good point and then either bring one down or split. Like so, or like so. Again, I see this played wrong all the time. And just remember, if you're hitting on a higher point, like the 5-point, the 4-point, or even the 3-point, you want to keep it there. You don't want to continue, even if you can hit a second checker. You want to do something else. So if you can remember that, that's going to save you a lot of errors. And these errors are important because the second roll occurs in every single game. Additionally, the other benefit of studying the second rolls and the opening rolls is that you learn these themes and ideas that you can apply to later in the game, like in the middle game or even in the end game, where the magnitude of the error is larger. So 4-1, this one is the same idea, although it's not as good because you're not able to bring another checker down. You just hit and split. Notice that the second best play is actually hitting and continuing. The passive play of playing 13-8 is a large error. Okay, now with the 3-2, Same thing. I think we kind of went through this one. You don't want to hit twice, right? You just want to hit and bring one down. Because of the fact that this checker is back here, you don't need to split quite as much because this checker is not covering as many inner board points. But when it was further ahead, you did want to split slightly better than bringing one down. But here, it's slightly better to bring one down than to split. And this one is an error. Okay. So this is one of the interesting things that I learned when I first started looking at the opening plays. The opponent rolls a 3-1. Now you roll a 6-4. How do you play a 6-4 here?
Make the 2-point.
Make the 2-point. Good. Any other options?
Running to the 14.
Running to the 14. Okay.
No, you could out and down, I guess.
Out and down, 24, 18, and 13 to 9. It turns out that in this case, the running play is the best here. Splitting is a small error, and then making the 2-point is actually a larger error. So what are the reasons for this? And I didn't show you this, but against a 4-2, it is correct to make if the opponent made the 4-point with a 4-2, now it's correct to make the 2-point with a 6-4. However, against a 3-1, it's different. Why is that? So what are the differences? Number one, a 3-1 is a small roll, so the opponent gained 4 pips. Now you're gaining 10 pips, so you're going to be ahead by 6 pips after the roll. The average roll is 8 approximately. So if you're ahead by 4, the race is approximately even. So now you're actually ahead in the race. So you do want to race. Whereas if you roll the 4-2, now the race is even because you're only going to be ahead by 4. Additionally, when the opponent rolls a 4-2 and makes this point, and then you come out to here, you're basically diversifying the 2s because 2s can be used to hit here, whereas they're not good over here. 3s and 1s are going to be used to hit here. Here, when you do that, you're duplicating the 4-2 because now you're preventing the opponent from making the 4-point with a 4-2, and that makes the best 3-point board, which is called the rack of 6, 5, and 4-point. Additionally, you're creating those diversified rolls like the DVD1 rolls, the 5, 4, 4, 3, and 3, 2 are becoming good. So this is a good one to remember. When the opponent rolls an opening 3-1, 4-2, 5-3, or 6-4, and then you roll a 6-4. After a 3-1, you want to run all the way. After the other ones, you make the 2-point. Okay?
Would you explain one more time, please, Alex, what you mean when you say duplicate the rolls?
So here, let's say you play here, and then white rolls a 4-2. How is white going to play a 4-2 here? Well, the 2 is going to be used to hit. It could otherwise be used to make the 4-point. So you're duplicating the 4-2. Does that make sense? It's a secondary duplication. It's not duplicating a hitting 2 and a covering 2. It's duplicating only that one 4-2 roll.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. My pleasure. Those are hard to understand, but when you start kind of repeating these things over and over, you'll start to get them. And I was in the same place when I first started. So this turns out to be a small error. Anytime your opponent has a stronger board, you want to be careful because you're leaving a blot right here, and the opponent has good 6s. And a 6 will be good because white will be able to unstack the heavy midpoint and hit. So you don't want to do that. And then this one is not good because you're ahead in the race, so you're going to want to do something in terms of racing. And this one doesn't really prime very well. The 6-4 is not a good priming roll. Okay? Now the 3-2. So this is another one you're just going to have to learn. Okay? The key here is whenever your opponent is starting to make a priming structure, so here there's the 6 and the 5 along with the 8, that's a nice priming structure. So you're going to want to try to escape by either escaping with like a double 6, double 3, something like that, or a 6-5, or preparing to escape by splitting. So here the best play is to split, but where do you want to split to? The 21 or the 22? Again, you don't want to split to the next point the opponent wants to make. You want to split to the 22. So here it's slightly better to split to the 22 and bring one down, despite the fact that you're putting the checker on the 10 point where some of your rolls are duplicated, like 3-1, 5-3, and 6-4. And 6-4 is also duplicated, and 3-1 is also duplicated on this side. This is one of those ones you're going to have to kind of memorize. Here, you're just, so if white rolls a 6-3 after this, he's supposed to hit loose. Okay? So you don't want to split to the point that the opponent wants to make next. Close, this is a small error, the 2 up. When the opponent has 8 checkers in the zone, that's not that many, so it's not terrible to actually bring 2 up, to try to potentially make an advanced anchor or have a lot more escaping numbers like 8s and 9s or even 11s and 10s, or like 4-3 that can anchor here, or 6-5 that can anchor here, or basically any ace. This one is also an error. You don't want to leave all these blots when you're outboarded, because if the opponent hits here, he's doing a lot of good things. Partially escaping, hitting another checker or a third checker back, and with a stronger board. You're going to be in a lot of trouble. So you want to avoid that. Okay, so now the opponent rolled a 2-1 slotting. These ones are tough. I don't think I've memorized this one. So it turns out you want to just run all the way. And look at what happens here. White can hit with 3s and 1s, but also cover with 3s and 1s. So there's a lot of duplication. This is direct duplication because it's hitting with a 3 and covering with a 3. Hitting with a 1 and covering with a 1. So all the 3s and 1s are duplicated. If you do this, you're duplicating the hitting 6s with the covering 6s here. But that's not quite as strong as the other duplication. And the 2-up play is also close because you're duplicating the hitting 1s, the hitting 6s and the hitting 1s with the covering 6s and the covering 1s. But here there's a lot of like pick and pass numbers, so you have to be careful about this type of play here. And this turns out to be an error because there's just a lot of hit and cover plays, hit and cover rolls, like 4-2, 6-2, 6-3, a lot of them. So you have to be careful. Now with the 6-2, this one's slightly different. It turns out that here it's better to do this kind of split. Because if you were to run here, you're not duplicating the 3s and 1s. You're giving them 4s and 2s to hit with 3s and 1s here. But here, at least you're duplicating the 6s to hit here and cover here, as well as the 1s that hit here and cover here. Close second is actually this, because here you're duplicating the 6s and 3s that cover here and hit on this side. And this is also close because you're duplicating the 6s. So a lot of duplication here. And this one is actually close too because you're duplicating the 6s. If the opponent hits, you'll probably have a return shot. And if he doesn't hit, you're going to have some offensive potential here. And this one is actually an error. You don't want to counter slot with this kind of play. And then the running play, as I said, it doesn't duplicate anything. It actually diversifies because it gives 4s and 2s to hit here with 1s, 3s, and 6s to cover. So you want to avoid that. Okay, now double 1. I did not show this, but if the opponent slots with an opening 2-1 and you roll a 3-1, how would you play that? We're getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know who that is. Maybe you can mute yourself. In any event, with the 3-1, it's correct to actually hit here rather than making your own 5-point. It gains in the race, slots the best anchor, and just, you know, although it fails to unstack the 6-point and make the valuable 5-point, you just get a lot out of it. However, with a double 1, you're actually able to make 2 points. You're able to make the 5-point and the bar point. So that's just giving up too much to actually forego making those points and just hit. So in this case, it's an error to do that. Okay? So I think that was the last of it. Is everyone still awake?
Yes.
If you're not awake, raise your hand.
Barely.
I know that was a lot, but I I think this is the kind of thing you're going to want to learn because the second roll occurs all the time, and there are small errors, but if you make them frequently, you're going to lose a lot of equity. So I have a few summary slides, and this is going to be included. I have a PDF version of this that will be attached, and I'm happy to send to you. And anyone is welcome to email me. My email will be somewhere in the description, and ask me questions. I also wanted to, again, welcome everyone here in the audience, whether they're live or watching this recorded, to join me for a video on my YouTube channel. I do a lot of I call it the backgammon versus the bot, where the guest plays a 3-point match against XG with optional consulting with me, followed by an analysis, and that's really fun and it's very educational. So, tips for the second roll. Try to remember these things, and that will help you. So, first, try to escape your back checkers or prevent your opponent from doing so. Remember, the primary liabilities in the opening position are the back checkers for either player. So, you want to either try to escape yours or try to prevent your opponent from escaping. That's why the best opening rolls were 3-1, 4-2, 6-1, 6-5 in that order. Okay? Next thing, you want to try to make points. If you can make a point, that's good. Then hit strategically. So remember, you want to fight for the good points. You want to hit on the 5-point, you want to hit on the 20-point, even on the 4-point and the 3-point. Oftentimes it's right to hit, as well as your bar point. The secondary liabilities in the opening position were your stacks on the 6-point and the 13-point or midpoint. So things you want to try to do is unstack the heavy points, the 6-point and the 13-point. As I mentioned earlier, there's a bigger urgency to unstack points with 5 checkers on it than with 4 checkers on it. Oftentimes, it's good to just play 2-1, an opening 2-1, just slotting, because of the fact that you can unstack both heavy points onto the 11-point, but more importantly, the 5-point, which is the next point you want to make. Okay, you want to try to bring checkers into the zone. So you start with 8 checkers into the zone, where when you have 9 checkers in the zone, your offensive power is stronger, and when you have 10, it's much stronger. So you want to think about that. I didn't go through this, but I have other videos on early double 5 blitzes, and it turns out if you have 8 in the zone, it's usually a take. But if you have 10 in the zone, it's usually a pass. And if you have a 9 in the zone, it's kind of in the middle. So having extra checkers in the zone is very important for attacking or blitzing. Again, fight for the high interboard points, like the 5-point and the 4-point. And again, avoid splitting against 10 checkers in the zone. So you remember when the opponent plays 2 down with a 5-4, a 4-3, or a 5-2, or even a 3-2, or 4-3, if I didn't mention that, you want to avoid splitting. You're going to play aces by slotting. Okay? What else? Hitting and splitting disconnects the opponent's checkers after an opening 6x split. So that refers to hitting and splitting with a 5-1 or a 5-4 or a 5-2. So imagine the opponent opens with a 6-4 split or a 6-3 split or a 6-2 split. When you roll a 5-4, 5-2, or 5-1, you're going to want to hit on the ace point and split your back checkers. And then hitting twice is better when you have 9 in the zone. That's why when the opponent splits with a 6-4, 6-3, or 6-2, you can hit twice with the 6-5, but not with the 5-1, because with the 5-1 you'll only have 8 in the zone, but with the 6-5 you're bringing an additional checker into the zone. As I mentioned numerous times, a checker on the 9-point creates many productive rolls because you have the additional rolls that will make the bar point, the 5-point, the 4-point, the 3-point, and so forth. Additionally, I did mention the spare on the 8-point is an asset. So you want to keep that there if you can. Once you use that spare, you try to replenish it by either bringing something down to the 8 point, such as a 5-1 when you're hitting after a 6-4 split or a 6-3 or a 6-2 split, or you can bring another checker down from the midpoint. And one of the biggest things, if you can remember this, hitting twice in your board is useful when the first hit is deep on the 2 point. So when the opponent splits with a 1 and then you roll a 4-1, then you're going to want to hit 2 checkers. But any other time, you don't want to hit 2 checkers. This is only on the second roll. So remember that. And that is all I have. I know it was a lot, but I hope that it was helpful. Let me stop sharing.
I subscribed to your YouTube channel just now, and I would like to know, because I have to go, if I can get your email address real quick.
My email is alexeshaghianbackgammon@gmail.com, and it's in the description of every video that you'll see
Oh,
on the
okay.
YouTube channel.
Okay. I'll just do that. Thank
Alex, I want to thank you very much. This was very helpful. I learned a lot,
Absolutely.
and I'm sure that watching the video again and some of your videos online will be very productive as well. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm happy to help. Again, I want to emphasize how important it is to me to get more people playing backgammon, and specifically more women and more youth playing backgammon. If you ever want to play a game, just contact me. We'll play. We'll have fun. And I tell people backgammon is a game. The most important thing is to have fun, and the idea is to have fun, learn, compete, and bring people together. Because I've never had this opportunity until I started my YouTube channel to play with so many different people in different parts of the world and meeting different people, different cultures. It's just such a wonderful thing that you're not able to do. And in part, that was because of the unfortunate pandemic, which was, something you never want to repeat. But I try to take positives away, and one of the positives is that we've created a lot of these Zoom kinds of things, which allows people to connect in that way. So I want to thank everyone for your time, for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you to the organizers for watching. It's been a pleasure to be here, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now, or you can contact me later.
Okay. Thank you for your time. Have a good night.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye, Alex.
All right. Bye-bye. We'll see you next time.
I